Welcome to the Lazy CEO Podcast, where Jim Schleckser, author of Great CEOs Are Lazy and founder of the CEO Project, features compelling experts and topics for CEOs of mid to large-size companies. Now, let's get started with the show.
Welcome, everybody, to another Lazy CEO podcast. My name is Jim Schleckser, and I am your host today. I'm also the CEO of the CEO Project, which, I don't know, may come up as we're talking. So, hey, today we're going to talk about, you just got me today. Sometimes we have guests, but today you just get me, which for good or for bad, but my dulcet tones for a little while. Today we're going to talk about organizational capacity. And, you know, it's not a word or a set of words that's used very commonly, but it turns out that it is a really critical element to your business to manage, particularly as you grow your business. You need to be thinking pretty strongly about organizational capacity. So what do I mean by organizational capacity? Organizational capacity is the capability of the people in your business to get stuff done. Basically, you know, if you got a pile of work, you know, X size of X, you got X capability to get that work done, more or less. I'm going to talk about mismatches in a little bit, but just basically the raw capacity to execute. And capability to execute is really two things. And again, I'll get into each of these in a little bit. One is just how many people you got in the company. Well, more people means more work, mostly, although not always. I'm going to talk about that too. The second is the capability of the people in your organization to take on work, their ability to do stuff for you and not get their heads all stressed out and crazy. So the capability of the people is really important as well. So the first thing let's talk about is just as you're growing your business, people do go through a cycle of growth, emotions. And there are two researchers by the name of Kelly and Connor that came up with what's called this emotional cycle of change model. And this may be familiar to you, but when you begin a change, and growth is change, by the way, let's be clear, you know, as you're growing your business, things are changing. You know, how much work I have to do, the scope of my job, my title, the way we do things, like stuff is changing all the time. So the first stage that not everybody, but almost everybody goes through, or at least Kelly and Connor thought people went through, is uninformed optimism. Like, that's like, all right, I'll believe this is going to be great, right? It's all going to work out. It's going to be awesome. I am uninformed with that opinion. I'm just optimistic about the future. Over time, as we begin to make the change, we begin to go down into the valley of despair, if you will. And the first stage of the valley of despair is informed pessimism. In other words, I've now begun to see this and it's ugly and it's messy and it's confusing and it's stressful and this is not working. And, you know, some of us are eternal optimists and we can always see our way through to the other side, and we don't really do this. But let me just tell you that the people in your organization do. Like, this is what they're feeling as you implement changes. So they're in this uninformed pessimism. Now, this is a really dangerous place. And the reason why it's dangerous is as people are in informed pessimism, like, I know it ain't going to work, right? That's informed pessimism because I've now gathered enough data to know it's not going to work. They can possibly check out mentally. So, you know, they're no longer engaged, they're no longer participating, they're no longer giving their best effort. And checking out privately then can lead to checking out publicly. And this is where your turnover happens. In other words, during informed pessimism is when people check out of your organization. That's when your turnover happens. So you got to be really attentive to this and be giving people signals that things are going to work out. Then they move to what they call hopeful realism. Like, okay, it ain't going to be perfect. We thought it was going to be perfect before when we were in uninformed optimism. We are now hopeful realism. It's going to be okay. It's better than it was. It's not perfect, but that's okay. And then stage 4, informed optimism. Yep, it's working. It turned out it's about as good as we thought it was going to be. Awesome. And then completion. So that cycle everybody goes through. And there's a related wall called Cantor's Law, another researcher that says everything can look like a failure in the middle. Everything can look like a failure in the middle. And so as you're going through change, realize that in the middle, no matter how successful it is in the future, it looks like a failure in the middle. So you got to go through that icky, swampy, emotional period to get to the other side. So just realize that people are going through that. And I want to, there's a reason why I went through that, because people experience change differently. I talk about how you might never go through this valley of despair. You might go, I know it's going to work always. Yeah, we got problems, but those are little, potholes on the road to the golden city. No big deal. And a lot of us as entrepreneurs, that's how we feel. As business leaders, that's how we feel. And in fact, it's kind of our job to present that view of change to the organization. But here's the thing. I built I'm going to patent this, by the way, just, for the record. But you heard it here first. Patent pending. Schleckser's law of growth. So if you can imagine a box, and on one side, it's organizational ability to execute. And on the bottom, you got the amount of work we've got in front of us. Now, obviously, the amount of work changes over time, particularly as we're growing. And then there's a line, a 45-degree line that slices that box in half from the bottom left to the upper right. So, 2 triangles basically stacked on top of each other. And when you have more organizational capacity to execute than you do work, I call that country club. Like, we're kind of chill, we're hanging out, we got stuff to do, but plenty of time to have coffee and talk about the football pool, and it ain't that busy. Now, I will warn you though. Well, let me go to the other side. If you have the other side, which is we've got more work to do than we do have organizational capacity to execute, that's stress city. And as leaders, we're always wiggling around that middle line. Sometimes we're in country club, sometimes we're in stress city. And actually, I have to say, most organizations are always in stress city. The only question is, how close do they get to the line? Very, very few organizations actually sit in country club with, current environment, pressure that we have. And I will say that you got to be careful, because I have run into organizations that are in country club. This happens particularly if you've been really successful. If you've been really successful, you're open to hiring people, you got the margin to do it, you still make money, and all of a sudden it becomes country clubbish. Nobody's stressed out, everybody's chill, the work is fully within their capability. In fact, worse than that, you're not fully engaging people in work there. But what happens is it tries to hide. And it hides in this way that work expands to fill the time. So, you every government employee you ever talk to will go, how you doing? They're like, flat out, man, I am absolutely redlined. But if you went and looked at many commercial companies, that amount of work compared to a commercial company, you go, boy, not so much. So there are these environments where they are overstaffed, meaning they have more organizational capacity than they need. It is a country club, but it hides because everybody finds a way to expand the work, to expand the hours they spend to the available work. So it looks like they're busy, and that's a job protection strategy. I mean, I know why people do it, but just realize it exists. On the other side, we got stress. Well, stress isn't necessarily bad or good, by the way. Some people respond positively to stress. Some people react negatively to stress. And remember, respond positive, react negative. And even around the 45-degree line that I said, that's like Goldilocks. That's like everybody's chill. The reality is that there is a standard distribution of how people respond to work and stress. So there may be some people that, even though you would argue we're at Goldilocks, like just the right amount of work for the organizational capacity, there will be people in your organization that go, I'm under stress. Well, they'd be under stress always, frankly. Like, they need to be in a country club environment to not feel stressed. And on the other side, you got some absolute workhorses. They will never get stressed. They will never tell you you're stressed. More work, sure, no problem, take it on. Like the amount of stress these people can take on would kill a normal human being. They exist in your organization, and I guarantee you know who they are. They look like A players, by the way. So you've got this game of listening to, do we have the right amount of capacity, people and talent, versus the amount of work we've got. And the signals you'll hear are stress, work-life balance, some of that. Now, you got to be careful who you're listening to because of that standard distribution. There will be people that always chirp on that issue. Doesn't matter how much work there is. There will be others that never say a word, no matter how much. You got to find somebody who's like your middle zone, takes work, but is not crazy worker, not, doesn't melt when there's a little bit of fire. They take on some stress. That's your person you should be monitoring for. Am I tuned correctly? Am I missing the mark in terms of how much stress? And there's been this big dialogue about work-life balance. I'd argue we probably got a little more delicate with regard to taking on stress than we were pre-pandemic, but it does exist. So let's say you've diagnosed your organization. You go, all right, we've got more work than we can handle. And you'll probably know when this exists. You got a couple of options. Buy or build, or borrow. Buy, build, borrow. Those are your options. Borrow, I'll just talk about quickly. That's find a third-party staffing company that can help you, or a partner that can help you, or something along those lines. But fundamentally, we've got build or buy. Buy is hire. So I'm going to go hire somebody into the organization to increase my organizational capacity. When you do this, you want to tick two boxes. One is, particularly when you're growing, one is you need the person in the job, right, as defined. So that's an increased organizational capacity just because there's a human in position. But more than that, what we advise and what I think is important, you need to hire ahead of your curve. So when I say that is if you're a growing organization, you're 20 million or 40 million or 100 million or 200 million, and you're on your way to double that number. If I hire somebody that is just competent to do the job, no more, just able to do the job, but fully competent, as I double, they are going to go to incompetency potentially unless they develop, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so ideally you hire somebody who's over your current capability, over your current size. If you're 40, they've done it at 100. If you're 100, they've done it at 200. So they already know what it looks like, where you're going. So they can, instead of, and I've had this experience, I talk about it in terms of energy in the relationship. Instead of pressing somebody to help you get where you need to be. Hey, have you thought about this? I need you on this. What about that? They're pulling you. Right? So think about that energy, me pushing versus me getting pulled, right? So I love people that come and go, hey, Jim, you know what we need to do? We need to do bup, 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 bup. We had this in my prior company. It worked great. We've got the same exact problem. We can solve it with this technique. We're like, wow, great idea. Go do that, right? As opposed to you've got to come up with all the ideas and you've got to push the energy into them. So this is part of why you want to overhire, also so that you got some runway that they're going to be good for you for another fill in the blank years as you double the company. Again, if you hire, now what that means is you're going to spend more money. You're going to hire somebody who's probably over clubbed for the shot. You're going to spend a little extra money. So this is not the economic solution, but is the long-term value solution. The other thing to think about here is managers hiring these people. I've talked before about A's, B's, and C's, right? A's vastly overperform the job given. B's are fully competent, do the job great every day of the week. C's are under capability for the job. And, every organization, again, there's another standard distribution. Most people are B's, fully competent, fully capable. There's a chunk of A's, 10, 20%. There's a chunk of C's, 10, 20%. And I don't care how good you are at hiring, by the way. That's almost always true. So the thing about it is you got to really, if you're trying to up the average capability, in other words, you should never hire somebody I'm talking about senior roles initially, but now every role, you should never hire somebody at the average capability in your organization. They should always be above average. So the whole idea here is I'm diluting my talent base upward as the company grows. Now, look, if you're just going flat, this is not so critical, although it will make your life easier. If you're growing though, and I'm hiring at the average, remember the average, it's like apricots or bananas or something. After 4 or 5 days, they start to go a little soft and get a little, icky. Same thing happens with people at capability in a fast growth organization. Unless they're really working on staying competent, they get a little behind the curve and they're not able to contribute the way they used to. So if I'm averaging up constantly, I'm always hiring above my average. I'm fighting that by bringing better people into the company over time. Now, I'll tell you, that causes stress. And who it causes stress for is the people that have been with you a long time, that when you were teeny weeny were perfectly good. And now that you're significant, they are less than fully competent. And then you hire people of above average competency into the organization. You can watch the stress-o-meter go right into the yellow and into the red. They're not going to be happy. They will feel the pressure of a whole different level of performance, which is going to basically very silently say, you are not at the standard we need in this organization. And that is incredibly stressful, as you can imagine. So hiring above average. Now, one other thing about hiring, and this is a classic mistake that entrepreneurs make every day of the week. Whatever you're doing, stop right now and listen to this. Please, I'm begging you. Don't get dazzled by the resume. It happens all the time. I talk to an entrepreneur and they go, oh my gosh, she graduated from Harvard and then she went to MIT and then she worked at McKinsey. And I can't believe she's going to come and work in my $30 million manufacturing company. And the answer is she isn't. Like, she might for a little while, and then she'll become incredibly frustrated and leave. Or you'll become incredibly frustrated with her. So people get dazzled with the resume. The other disease here of like big school, big company is big going to small. That is a very specific skill set. I remember one time I was looking at a resume of a guy, and he was like a president at AT&T, old AT&T. And I go, wow, president, dang, he's talking to me about a sales job. Why would he be willing to do this? And as I got talking to him, I found out what was involved in being a president at AT&T in those days. It may be different now. Like the guy had no real responsibility. In fact, he was a president, but he was a sales guy. That's all he did. And so I was thinking, oh, he's got HR and finance and IT and product development and da-da-da-da-da. No, he sold as a president. So the title and the company wowed me, but as I dug into what he actually did, I'm like, okay, he's not that impressive. And then it turns out that most of the time he sold mostly because he had the AT&T name behind him. He had no particular sales skills on top of it. So when I was in a market where you had to be a little grittier to get your orders. So if you are looking at a resume and you go, oh my gosh, she worked for, Amazon and then this and that, and now like, the ability to go from big to small is incredibly rare. So the probability of success of somebody with that big, dazzly, fancy, shiny resume to move into a smaller organization, unless they've done a lot of work in smaller organizations, I'm happy to take the bet on success because I'm going to win more than I'll lose on that one. It's a bad bet to make. So look for people that have, great resume, great schools, but chose to spend time in smaller organizations. They'll be a more successful individual. So just be careful of that on hiring. Let's move over to development for a little bit. And I've talked before about how much should you spend on development? And this is always a question, but I tell people, if you really want to press the point, 1 to 2% of revenue, gross revenue on development. So if you're a $10 million company, $100,000 to $200,000 per year on talent development, just to keep up with it. If you're growing fast, probably at the higher end of that range. And people go, oh my God, Jim, that's a lot of money. But there's a classic like joke that is the CFO and the CEO talking. And the CFO goes, what happens if we invest all this money in people and then they leave? And the CEO wisely says, well, what happens if we don't invest the money and they stay? So, you kind of got two choices. You either invest the money and have the risk that they might leave your organization at some point, bummer, but at least they were better while they were here. Or, well, I'm not going to spend that money. And then as you grow, they become less and less and less competent, like those 7-day-old bananas that I talked about. So what are your strategies? What's available to you to help develop your people to deal with this organizational capacity issue that I framed the whole problem on? One is depth. Give them more of the same. Stretch them. Managers grow under stress. And I don't mean like massive, I can't sleep stress, but, stress that makes me feel like I'm not fully competent. So, you always want to be on the steep part of the learning curve as a manager. That's how you grow. The minute I get to, what do they call it? Conscious competency or unconscious competency, right? I've done this so often, I don't even have to think about doing it anymore. It's time for more work at that point. And ideally for somebody you want to grow, before they get to that point, you throw more stuff on top of them to keep them on that sharp part of the curve. So breadth, depth, more of the same. You're running an engineering group with 10, now you're going to run 20. You ran one team, now you're going to run 2 teams, so forth. You used to only do accounts payable, now you're going to do accounts receivable too, for example. Breadth is the other one. We're now, and that last one was actually more of a breadth example. I'm now to expand you horizontally into other processes, other things that we do that you have not previously had exposure to. And interestingly enough, I find this to be one of the better development techniques. If I came up a field, let's say I'm an accounts receivable person and I'm growing and I'm now in charge of it, and you want to, and I know that area cold, it's easy for me to be a manager because I know, like I can just smell the wind and I know if there's a problem because I'm so good at it. But now I jump over to accounts payable, which I don't know, or some other payroll, which I don't know. I can't depend on my technical skill to run it anymore. I actually have to learn how to be a manager or leader because I can't fall back on my technical skill. So breadth is a really important element of developing somebody longer term as your organization continues to grow. Cross-functional is another. And this is where, hey, I've got a problem that cuts across a couple of chunks of my organization. I need a couple of people to work together on that collaboratively that understand each area. If you want to develop people, put them in charge of that process, or even just on that team, they'll learn stuff like, oh, now I know why those people in accounting are so crazy. I get it now, right? That's a big discovery. That's a big learning if you're not an accountant. But cross-functional or leadership of cross-functional teams, a great way to develop people. Fourth is education. Straight up, you don't understand accounting and finance well enough, I'm going to send you to an AMA class or a University of Chicago class or a Wharton school, and you're going to learn accounting and finance, at least at the level that you know the right questions to ask. I don't need you to be an expert. And I've always told people, I don't need to be an expert. I just need to be smart enough to ask all the right questions. If I can ask the right questions, I'm going to do just fine. So education to that level. But it's very point solution oriented, right? I need you to learn digital marketing. I'm going to send you to school on digital marketing, for example. And then the last one, but I'm really a bigger believer on the job training. I think you learn a lot in the gray zone and the hard decisions and so forth. But school is useful, and I'm all over education. Trust me, I love it. But it's not always the right answer. And then the final one is external exposure. I think particularly if you have an organization that has a purpose and a community involvement and a higher mission, external involvement is really important. Two areas for that specifically. One is leadership, particularly in volunteer organizations. Big fan of that. And I had one organization I worked with that was very charitable in their local community. They gave to Junior Achievement and Habitat for Humanity and a bunch of other more local charities that you wouldn't know the names of. And they go, look, we're going to write a check, and we want to have Bruce here or Sharon here, and we want them to go on your board. And they're a young, high potential, up and comer manager leader in our organization. And we want you to we're going to put you on the board. Two things happen. One is they learn how another organization does stuff, which is really interesting. Now, I'll argue there are very few nonprofit organizations that I would say are the pinnacle of operational excellence. Many of them are not, but they do a lot of things really well. The governance is usually pretty good, and they will build their network and meet interesting people that may be relevant to them and the business going forward. So effectively, they build their executive equity, social equity, by meeting people out in the organization through nonprofits. Some of the most interesting relationships I've ever developed professionally occurred from people that I met on nonprofit boards. So that's a huge winner as a way to develop people. Excuse me. And then and this is more for a very senior person, like a succession candidate or somebody like that, put them on the board of another company to the extent you can find it. It could be a board of a friend. It could be a board of somebody you know. It could be a smaller company that needs help, even if it's non-paid. Because again, we go back to now we're operating on a for real board of a for-profit company, seeing how they do things, how they think about things, how they solve problems, how their governance runs. That is all really informative as they come back into the organization and operate with you. Potentially, they could be your successor. And that would all be really helpful as they potentially become your successor. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Organizational capacity, the amount of work you have in front of you, the implications for stress, what your options are in terms of hiring, how you should think about hiring, and how you should think about developing people. So keep an eye on this one. People don't pull it out as an absolutely critical factor, but I'm going to say it may be the most critical factor to your long-term success. So on that note, I wish you good luck, and I hope to see you next time on the Lazy CEO podcast. Thanks for joining us. Bye. This podcast is brought to you by the CEO Project. At the CEO Project, we work with CEOs to help them grow their business. And our members represent billions of dollars of revenue and profit. And frankly, amongst all of us, we've probably made every mistake in the book, including some you haven't made yet. So if you want to learn from the experience of a bunch of really seasoned CEOs, we're a great place to hang out. In this podcast, what you're going to hear are some of those ideas, concepts, and things that are just going to help you on your journey. If you want to find out more, reach out to us at theceoproject.com, or you can contact me personally at jim@theceoproject.com. Happy listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lazy CEO podcast. We'll see you next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes, and check out our website, www.theceoproject.com.